Now, in the previous lecture, we've seen what is a this keyword, and to put it simple, that the this keyword will refer to the object before the dot, which is the one that is executing the function, right? And if there's no dot or object, it means that is the window object the one that is executing that function, right? So if we want to call this method on this object, we'll just need to use the identifier for the object, so plain, then the dot to access the property, then the name of the property, and the parentheses to invoke that function or this behavior, right? And we get this output. But what happens if we invoke this method from outside this object, right? We'll get an error. And that's just because if the window object is the one that's behind this method, so if we inspect the window, right, there's no fly method inside the window object. Here you can see how there's no fly method, right? So it's good to imagine that all the code that we write, so I'll just comment it out for a minute, is inside a big object called window, right? Something like this. And that's just because, right? So we're working inside this space because JavaScript is a hosted language that needs some environment where to execute the code. In this case, the browser. And it is organized on objects. And the biggest object is the window object. And that's why we're always working inside this window, right? Now, considering this, if we want to add a method to the window object, we just need to declare a function in the global scope, which belongs to the window object. So something like this. I'll just call it method. Console log new method, right? Now, if we check the window again, we can see how a method is right there, right? Now, if we want to add a method to the window object, right, called fly, we just need to declare another function with this name. Now, if we invoke this method, it works, right? And we can also do something like this. Or even this. Because this keyword here is referring to the window object, right? And you can see how this name is not in the console. And that's because, so far, if we inspect the window object again, we can see how this name property is just an empty string. So let's give it a name. We'll just say window in capital so it's easier to see. Right? Now we can see how the window is flying. Right? Now, as a side note, I just wanted to mention that it's pretty easy to interfere with the methods and properties inside the window. So if we do something like this, and we try to use some method inside the console, like console log, just to say hello, right? It won't work because now this object is just an empty string, so there's no log method. But if we comment this out, it will work again, right? I just want you to be aware of that. Now, what happens if we want to use this method but inside another method that belongs to the window object? So something like this, right? And then we use the method fly. I'll give it 2 seconds. In this case, here, we're not calling this method. We're actually just referencing this method, right? Because setTimeout expects as a first parameter a function definition and not a function call. That's why it is pointing to the window. So this .name is pointing to the window, as you can see. But no worries, we'll talk about this in the question section, right? Now let's talk about arrow functions. To see how the this keyword behaves inside arrow functions, I'll just choose an object. I'll just call it big object. I'll give it a name. And some methods. Call the first one method. And we'll use a regular function here. this name to see where it points, right? And the next one will be using an arrow function. I'll call it arrow. Console log as well. Oops. This name. Now let's see what happens. If we invoke these methods, we do the same with the arrow function, we can see how the arrow points to the window, right? While the other one is pointing to the big object. And if we add some other methods but inside nested objects, so something like this, medium object, I'll give it a name as well, and the same methods as above, right? And then we nest another object here, like a small object, and again the same methods, right? I'll just change this. Three. Now we'll call them on this object, right? So I'll just add medium object. We see how it points to the window, right? And even with the next one, so with a small object, we get the same behavior, right? It also points to the window object. That's because no matter how many nested objects and how many levels it has, the arrow function will always point to the window object, right? And that's because, in fact, arrow functions, they don't have their own binding to the this keyword. And this binding is just a way to relate an identifier to a value. That's why, in the case of the this keyword, inside an arrow function, it will point to the window object. It's like as if it finds no connection, then it gives us the window object by default, let's say. So that's why it is not recommended to use arrow functions as methods inside our user objects, unless of course you want to refer to the window object, right? Well, I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. And I'll see you in the next lecture.